Good morning, everybody. We are starting a new book. What is today? The 4th of September. And we are starting a new book here, From Rebellion to Exile. If you need a book, let us know and we will get it to you. If you have a prayer request, let us know and we will hook you up on that. We have prayed ourselves in, so put me on pause for a minute and pray yourself in and we'll get started. So we're in the first one. Do you have a book? Where are the books, Mr. Nick? You got one? All right. Sorry about that. I knew I was forgetting something before we started. Okay. All right. So there's a little introductory thing here, and this is unusual for this book series. Usually they skip and kind of skip some stuff before they go into a new book. This one does not. It goes from one verse right to the next. No hiccups in there at all. And what we're talking about is a period of time when Solomon was getting old, and like some other leaders we know, he got old and dumb. But he started out, and as Nick was talking about last week, he started out as being the wisest man that just generally considered to be the wisest person that ever lived on planet Earth. That came as a direct result of God blessing him with an answered prayer when Solomon asked for wisdom. He was in his teens when he took over as king. He was in over his head, and he was well aware that he was in over his head. He had no pride about that. He freely admitted, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. And he asked God for the wisdom and the discernment to be able to run that country and to rule over this people. God was impressed by that. So he said, since you have asked for that, instead of asking for victory over your enemies or long life or riches or whatever, since you have taken the right path, I will give you what you asked for, plus I'll give you all the stuff you didn't ask for, right? So God granted him wisdom like nobody has ever had, wealth like nobody has ever had, although Jeff Bezos and some of those guys might be pushing the limit right now. But he is generally considered to be the richest man that ever lived, the wisest man that ever lived. And his kingdom was graced with peace. They had a long, almost a 40-year run of peacefulness in there. But that, as great as it sounds, I mean, that's what pretty much every governor, every ruler hopes for, is a peaceful time. That blessing in itself actually turned into sort of a double-edged sword. It was a great thing. They had prosperity. The country was prosperous like nobody had ever been before. They had this great king that was looking after them and always going well. And this king, rather than fighting wars, he was going around making treaties with all the countries that didn't like them, which were pretty much, a lot of them. So all the surrounding countries, Solomon was going around. Now, most of these countries had been conquered by his father David, the big warrior king, right? So David had conquered most of these countries, but they were still, it was sort of a hard feeling, right? Somebody that you conquer is never going to be your ally. Okay, they might be your subject, but they're not going to be your buddy. So Solomon went around and was making treaties, and so that it would be a lasting peace. It wouldn't be a begrudged peace. It would be a lasting peace, and where there's something in it for everybody and all of that. And that's where the double-edged sword came in, is because he was making these treaties. Just part of the thing back then. It seems pretty abhorrent to us right now, but in our culture, it seems like a totally goofy way to do it. But part of the deal was, if you made a treaty, they like to have a marriage covenant in there to sort of seal the deal. So it was almost a normal thing where if a king made a treaty, the lesser king would offer one of his daughters in marriage to the greater king. All right, and it would just sort of seal the deal. Like we'll make this all family. Okay, and so now we're not enemies. We're not conqueror and conqueree. We're family now. And it's an understandable. It wasn't so great for the women, I guess, but it was an understandable thing that okay, well now we're family. So, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago that it was almost like Solomon would make a new treaty, get a new wife, make another treaty, get another wife, make another treaty, get another wife. And it ended up that he had this insane number of wives when God's ideal was one man, one woman. And so he completely went off the rails, rather than finding some other way to make a covenant with these surrounding countries. It was make a treaty, get a wife, make a treaty, get a wife. And so this great number of pagan wives was not God's plan, not by any stretch of the imagination. And God told him not to do it. He did it anyway. And as we talked about, there is an application here to us as completely out of the realm of reason as it seems now to have not only more than one wife, but to have hundreds of, and so he had 700 wives, and then 300 that weren't quite wives. They were sort of concubine, mistress sort of things. It was crazy. It was just completely crazy. And as unrelatable as that is to us, it really doesn't take more than one mate to run you off the rails. If you, and it's really not okay. I see you laughing over there. It's not okay to date somebody that's not a believer. And I don't mean that as a rule. I mean it as something that works and something that doesn't. Okay. I'm not making rules here. Don't hear me wrong, but it's not okay because your belief systems will not line up. They just won't. And there's, I should have looked it up and I didn't, but there is a chapter and verse in the Bible that says bad company corrupts good character. Right? And if your mate is the bad company, it's hard to please a mate that doesn't believe what you believe. And not that you have to agree on everything, because you won't. You two don't agree on everything. Sean and I don't agree on everything. You're not going to. Okay, if you're looking for somebody that's an absolute hand in glove fit, you're a mirror image of each other, and there are no differences between you, don't even worry about it. It ain't gonna happen. Okay, life does not work that way. People do not work that way.
Trying to figure out, when he built his house and built the temple, he had 700 or 1,000 women's opinions.
Oh. Okay, I mentioned Andy Andrews before. He's one of my favorite authors and writers. He started out as a comedian. He said he was he was reading the Bible in bed one night, and his wife was sort of, halfway in between being awake and asleep. And or no, I'm sorry, I got it backwards. His wife was reading the Bible. He was almost asleep. And she was reading that part, and she said, "It says here that Solomon had 700 wives. Why would anybody want 700 wives?" And Andy said he knew he shouldn't have done it, but he was half asleep, and he just rolled over and said, maybe he was hoping to come home and find one of them in a good mood. And that's when the fight started. But anyway, see, you led me into that. I didn't mean to tell that. Anyway, so, but it does not take multiple mates to lead you into trouble. And the thing is, like I say, I don't mean to make rules here, but the reason it's not okay is because your belief system is set up as a Christian person. If theirs is not, your whole core reason for living is going to be different. Your whole philosophy of life is going to be different. The reason you get up in the morning is going to be different. And that's just not a sustainable way to start. Something's going to give somewhere. Either you're going to give, or the mate's going to give, or you're going to split or something. It doesn't work well. And yeah, so that's That's the deal there. It's not a rule. It's just a matter of what works and what doesn't. So Solomon, let's see, the way the book put it here, at some point in Solomon's wise reign over Israel, he succumbed to foolishness and worshipped idols. Thought that was an interesting way to put it. He succumbed to foolishness. Solomon eventually was the one that gave in to all these pagan wives, and he started giving in to their desires of how they wanted to worship and what they wanted to worship. And he started building idols to their gods. And they were polytheists. You know, they had a god of sun and a god of moon and the god of rain and the god of whatever. And so he started giving in and building temples to these pagan gods to make his wives happy. Did not make God happy. So that's where he went off the rails. So God came to him late in his life, and he said, because you have done this, I am going to tear the kingdom away from you. He had to be expecting that. I mean, I don't know where his great wisdom, it was almost like his great wisdom turned opposite, you know, to great foolishness. But anyway, he had to have seen that coming, but I don't know if he did or not. Anyway, God says, I'm going to tear the kingdom away from you, but God didn't, I'm grossly paraphrasing here, but God basically was saying, but I got a problem because I promised your daddy that this family would always have somebody on the throne. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to tear it away from you. I'm just going to tell you that I'm going to. I'm going to take it away from your son. And I'm not going to take it all away. I'm going to leave one remnant. I'm going to leave one tribe of these 12 for your family to run. But the rest of the kingdom is going to be, your son is going to be the one to lose it. Deal with that, bucko. God put the word on Solomon, and I don't know which would be worse, to be the one that loses the kingdom under your watch, or to know that your son is going to fail. And, you know, either way, the kingdom's lost. God just told him that ahead of time. So then Solomon dies. And then I had a problem when I was preparing for this. God's son was Rehoboam, I think. Did I get that right? Yeah. Solomon's son was Rehoboam. The next player in this drama here is Jeroboam. So I had Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and those two names gave me a fit. It was like Elijah and Elisha, the two prophets, one right behind the next. Okay, they were contemporaries. They knew each other well, but those two names are it's two different guys, but those names are far too interchangeable. My family, there were like 4 of us that were named John. Okay, so that was, and finally I lived long enough to not be little Johnny anymore. Okay, so, you know, that's life. There's names. So I took the great liberty. I don't mean any disrespect to anybody, but I had to rename these guys just to keep it straight in my own mind, because the two very nearly the same names were giving me a fit. So Solomon's son, Rehoboam, I named him Red. All right. And then Jeroboam, I named him Jerry. All right. So we got Solomon's son, Red, and the next guy is Jerry. Now, Jerry was one of Solomon's servants. Excuse me. He was very talented, very well respected, a natural leader, and he became head of Solomon's labor force. All right. So he was like the Secretary of Labor, so to speak. He was the head of all the laborers and slaves and workers under Solomon. Did a great job. They respected him. He was their leader and all of that. So when Solomon died and Red took over, Red, by the way, was, I think, 41 years old when he took office. So he was established. He was a grown man. But he was probably also spoiled and sheltered and all of that, because he had grown up in Solomon's house. He was the prince. All right. So I'm speculating on that, but that seems to be the case. He was probably spoiled, sheltered, not worldly, shall we say, and he certainly did not inherit Solomon's wisdom. He might have inherited Solomon's late life craziness, but he certainly did not inherit the wisdom. Um, so he also inherited Solomon's wealth, the wealth of the king. So he was an insanely rich guy. This is a little aside. This is totally non-scriptural. This is just something that happens. But there have been studies done that in families where there's great wealth, and I'll use the Vanderbilts as an example, the ones that built Biltmore House up in Asheville. There was one person, they called him Commodore. I think his name was, I forget his name, Cornelius Vanderbilt, I think. I'm not sure. Anyway, they called him Commodore Vanderbilt. He was the one that made all the money. And I don't have time to tell you the whole deal, but he made some extremely wise decisions, and he was a very shrewd, very ruthless businessman, and he made an insane amount of money in his lifetime. His son came up, all right? He taught his son how to do what he did. The son was also very sharp. He took that big fortune and multiplied it, made it a ridiculous fortune. So that was the son. The grandchildren grew up under the son, who was very well-to-do to start with, all right? So they kind of came up, and they weren't as much of go-getters, and the next generation was even less of go-getters and whatever. Generally speaking, in a family with great, great wealth, that wealth does not perpetuate. It does not carry down through the generations more than 2 or maybe 3 generations. And so Commodore Vanderbilt made his money in the early to mid 1800s. I think I'm telling that right. Then the next generation that expanded it, that was in the mid to late 1800s. They had a family reunion, and I think it was 1935, 1940, somewhere in there, at Biltmore House. They had a family reunion, and all these Vanderbilt descendants came together, and there was, I think, over 100 of them. There was not one single millionaire in the bunch, just a couple of generations later. All right, so imagine Bill Gates or what was Amazon, Jeff Bezos, or some of these mega rich people. Chances are that 2 or 3 generations from now, that insane wealth that they have will probably not be there. It's just the way it rolls. So back to Red. Red inherited all this stuff, but he did not inherit his dad's wisdom. Okay, so first shot out of the box, Jerry comes up, the head of the labor secretary. He comes up and he says, look, the people are upset because later in your dad's life, he was not treating them well. He was beating them up. He was working them too hard. He was punishing them too harshly and all of this. Said they're tired of it. They are over it. All right. So here's what we're asking. How about you just lighten up a little bit and just, take off some of the load, give them a day off once in a while, whatever. Maybe pay them a little better, whatever, and they will serve you. They'll sign on and they will be loyal to you. No problem. Just lighten up a little bit. Okay. All right. So Red says, all right, tell you what, come back in 3 days and let me think about it. So in the meantime, in those 3 days, Red went and asked the elders around the palace there, so what do you guys think? These were the older guys that had been there with Solomon. And they said, yeah, you know what? We can see that. I actually think that sounds reasonable. I don't think that would be showing weakness for you to do that. Just be their butt, lighten up on them a little bit and take the deal. Yeah, we think that's probably a good thing. Okay, so then Red goes to his contemporaries, the young guys that had grown up with him, the young spoiled guys that had grown up in great wealth and privilege around the palace, the courtiers around there, and said, okay, hey guys, what do you think? No. That'll be showing great weakness if you did that. They will not respect you. They will tear you to pieces. Do not do that. make it worse. You tell them you think you had it bad. You wait till you see what I can do. You show them strength. Okay. And so he had these two. Which way am I going to go? He decided to go with the young guys. All right. So he rejected the wisdom of the elders, and he went with the wisdom of the youngers, and came to them. And 3 days later, Jerry and the workers came back, and which was, as usual, there was a vast number of workers and a few elites at the very top. All right. And came to him, and he decided to say, nope, I'm going to make it worse instead of better. You think you had it bad before, you wait and see what I'm going to do to you. Now get back to work. And by the way, you're working overtime and you're not getting paid. All right. And sent them off. And that quick, they said, nope, we're done. And they walked off. All right. So, interesting thing though, before this happened, Jerry, the labor guy, had met up with a prophet with the name of Ahijah, I think is how you pronounce that. And Ahijah, this is a long process, but anyway, he told him that God is going to take the kingdom away from Red. When he takes the kingdom away from Red, he's going to give you, there's 12 tribes, right? He's going to give you 10 of them. And you guys are going to take over Israel. There's going to be a dividing line. We'll figure that out later, but there's going to be a dividing line. And the only group that's going to stay is Judah is going to stay with Red. The rest of them are going to be yours. Now, maybe you can help me out with this, Nick. We're missing a tribe here. Would that be the Levites?
I think probably maybe the Levites.
That's what I'm thinking too. Might have stayed, but they were sort of the neutrals in all of this. They were the priestly, right? They were the priestly group and all that. So, and then God came to after the kingdom divided and the whole labor force walked off, and Red is left with basically one tribe, the tribe of Judah. Then the rest of the nation walks off, and they go back to Israel. There's a dividing line, so Jerusalem, the capital, is left in Judah, and pretty much the rest of it stays Israel, but it is not the line of David. The reason that happened, like God told Solomon near the end of his life, I'm going to keep my promise that the line of succession to the Messiah will come through your house. But the rest of the country, your son is going to lose it. And what nobody thought of was that he would lose it that quick. Like his first major decision as king, that was when the kingdom split. Okay, so then God comes to Jerry. Okay, Jerry, you are now the leader of this group. And God made him a promise. He said, if you will follow my ways and you'll do what I tell you to do, he basically made him the same promise that he made Solomon back in the old days. If you will do what I tell you to do, follow my ways, follow me, I will make you a great king. Have you ever had something where you tell somebody, you make somebody a promise and all of that, but there is no chance that it's going to work, right? Okay. You make a deal, but in your heart it's not going to happen. Well, I think that's what God was doing. This is me talking. This is not in Scripture, but I think God was basically doing that. He made Jerry the promise. You do what I tell you to do, and this is going to work out great. You're going to be a great king, and I'll make you the same promise I made to Solomon. But God knew it wasn't going to happen, and it didn't. So we'll kind of leave Red behind at the moment, and just with the understanding that he was no Solomon by no stretch of the imagination. He was nothing to write home about. But this lesson is about Jerry. Jerry goes off and becomes king. All right. Now Jerry has a problem, and the problem is that Jerusalem is where everybody goes to worship. Right. That's where all the festivals, all the feasts and everything are, and that's a problem because that's in the other country. That's in Red's country. All right, so he fortifies two existing cities that were between him and Jerusalem. And these were basically barrier cities. All right. And his thought was, if these people go back to Jerusalem to worship all the time, they're going to eventually just go back, right? And I'm going to get left in the mix, and they're probably going to end up killing me. So he started dreaming up all these terrible things that were going to happen to him. In other words, he lost faith in God. He did not follow God's promise that God would take care of him. He either forgot it, didn't believe it, or circumstances led him to think that that was not going to happen. And it led him straight into idolatry, or following his own wisdom. All right. And there's a real good thing here. The fear of the Lord, is that a little inset in here? Yeah, it's really good. Bottom of page 2. So it says, for the believer, the fear of the Lord is displayed in reverence and awe. It leads to faith in, worship of, and humble submission to God. And then it gives the scripture to back that up. Unbelievers have no fear of God, however, leading to evil actions. That is, until they are confronted with God's greatness, whether through the gospel or in death. Therefore, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and that's Proverbs 9 and 10. I thought that was really good. If you believe in the Lord, it gives you the courage. If you don't believe in God, you would be smart to not. You would be smart to live in fear. Okay, it's if you don't have God, if you're not saved by Jesus, you have every right to be absolutely terrified. Good plan. Okay, you should be terrified. The best example I can think of is COVID, right? The people of God were the ones that sort of, I don't mean to sound braggy here, but sort of kept our heads, because we were thinking, okay, well, we certainly don't want to die, and yes, we're scared of the disease and all of that, but on the other hand, okay, this disease is threatening us with heaven. Okay, so if we die, okay. The people not of God were absolutely off the rails terrified, because death is the worst thing that can possibly happen to them. And I think deep down in their hearts, they know it. Okay, they were right. With us, we know that we have something better on the other side, so death is not the worst thing that can happen to us. For them, it is. So it's a natural progression that if you don't believe the promises of God, you are going to fall into fear, panic, and all of that. In a financial study I was doing one time, it was this guy's a very successful stock trader, and stocks and options and futures and all that stuff. And he said that he's also a great teacher. And he said, I have never, ever yet met a successful trader that got successful by being the best panicker on earth. I panic better than anybody else because panic leads you into stupid decisions. Jerry, not being a believer, he just makes it, just blatantly obvious that he was not a believer. So he started making stupid decisions. He told the people, you don't need to go to Jerusalem, because he knew if they went to Jerusalem that his days were numbered. He said, y'all don't need to be going to Jerusalem. Don't even worry about that. I'm going to build up some places for you to go here. All right. So first thing he did, I don't know what it is about golden calves, but man, they seem to prop up a lot. So over in point 2 here, we're in 1 Kings 12:28. I'm sorry, I forgot to give you all a Bible reference, but we're in 1 Kings 12. This is 12:28 through 33. So the king sought advice. Now, it doesn't say who he sought advice from, but apparently he didn't seek it from very good sources. He made 2 golden calves, and he said to the people, going to Jerusalem is too difficult for you. Israel, here are your gods that brought you up from the land of Egypt. Oh my goodness, what was he thinking? Man alive. We've seen this before. It never works. But again, he didn't know history, and what's the old saying? Those that don't know history are doomed to repeat it, right? So here's these golden calves again. All right, so He set up one in Bethel, the other one in Dan. This led to sin. The people walked in procession before one of the calves all the way to Dan. Jerry also made shrines on the high places and made priests from the ranks of people who were not Levites. The Levites were the priests. They were the only priests. Okay, you had to be in that tribe to be a priest. He started making just any guy off the street a priest and wanted to be a priest. Jerry made a festival in the 8th month and the 15th day, like the festival in Judah. He offered sacrifices on this altar with the calves. He made this offering to Bethel to sacrifice the calves he had made. He also stationed priests in Bethel. He offered sacrifices on the altar he had set up. On the 15th day of the 8th month, he chose this month on his own. So now he's making up festivals. Okay, he's making up times to worship and celebrate. He offered sacrifices on the altar. He burned incense. It was like he did a list of things that he wasn't supposed to do. And it goes on and on about the stuff that he did. None of this was scriptural. None of this was of God. He did not pray. And okay, so it was a mess. Okay, so then we go to point 3 here. This is 1 Kings 13, 1 through 10. A man of God, however, from Judah came to Bethel by the word of the Lord while Jeroboam was standing beside the altar to burn incense. So he's getting ready to do some of these pagan rituals that he just made up. This man of God is not named. I don't know why. I thought that was interesting, but they don't give this prophet a name. Anyway, the man of God cried out against the altar. That's interesting. He didn't call out against the king. He called out against the altar by the word of the Lord. Altar, altar, this is what the Lord says. A son will be born to the house of David named Josiah, and he will sacrifice on you the priests of the high places who are burning incense on you. Right? I'm going to take these fake priests and they're going to be sacrificed on this altar. Human bones will be burned on you. He gave a sign that day. He said, this is the sign that the Lord has spoken. The altar will now be ripped apart and the ashes that are on it will be poured out. So he's saying this is going to happen now. Okay, when the king, Jerry, heard about the message this man of God had cried out against the altar at Bethel, Jerry stretched out his hand from the altar and said, seize him, or arrest him, depending on the translation you have here. But the hand he stretched out against the altar was withered, and he could not pull it back to himself. So he points at this guy, and all of a sudden his hand just like shrivels up, and he can't move his arm anymore, can't pull it back. The altar was ripped apart, and the ashes poured from the altar according to the sign that the man of God had given by the word of the Lord. Then the king responded to the man of God, plead for the favor of the Lord your God. Whose God? Not the Lord my God, the Lord your God. Please plead for the favor of the Lord your God and pray for me, so that my hand may be restored to me. So the man of God pleaded for the favor of the Lord, and the king's hand was restored to him and became as it had been at first. Then the king declared to the man of God, come home with me, refresh yourself, have dinner with me, and I'll give you a reward. But the man of God replied, if you were to give me half your house, I still would not go with you, and I wouldn't eat food or drink water in this place, for this is what I was commanded by the word of the Lord. You must not eat food or drink water or go back the way you came. So he went back another way, not by the way he had come to Bethel. All right, so Jerry gets the word pretty quick. This is not working, right? And this is not going to work. The man of God comes up, this unnamed person comes up and says what's going to happen, and it happens. But there's some interesting things here. He prays to God, and Jerry's hand is restored. Interesting. I see no other reason for that. The book offers no other reason for that other than just the grace of God. Okay, I've proven myself. You don't need to live that way. All right, so just as an act of charity, I'll give you your hand back. And he does. The interesting thing is that if you read on the rest of the chapter, it doesn't change Jerry's mind one little bit. Even though God showed him this grace, and favor and is kind of offering him a way out, Jerry did not take it. He kept on doing the evil things he had done, and we're running out of time, so I'll shorten it here, but Jerry's kingdom did not last. Okay. The prophecy was that a son will be born to the house of David named Josiah. Sure enough, Josiah was born, and Josiah was the one that took Jerry's kingdom away from him, just like it was prophesied. But even having your hand go useless and paralyzed on you, and then just as quick, whoop, it comes back again, even that did not soften his heart or make him think, maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree. Maybe I'm traveling the wrong path here. Maybe I need to talk to this God. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. When you're talking to people, and the subject of God comes up, and maybe they're interested to hear what you believe, and you try to tell them something, it's your responsibility, it's our responsibility as people of God to tell about the God we believe in and the God that has done so much for us. And by the way, you don't have to be a Bible scholar. Just tell them what God has done in your life. Nobody can take your testimony away from you. It's yours. Okay. Just tell them what God has done for you. Make it personal. And what happens then, that's your responsibility to tell that part. What happens then is not your responsibility. You've done your job. This guy saw a miracle of God in his own body, and it did not change his mind one little bit. Jesus himself, the Son of God, was walking on this earth, and a lot of people came up to him and talked to him and then walked away completely unchanged. And that was Jesus. Okay. A lot of people followed Jesus, but a lot of people didn't. The rich young ruler, right? He heard what Jesus had to say about his life, and he could not handle it. He walked off, and he enjoyed his money for as long as it lasted. But it is not your responsibility whether people follow Jesus, right? God does not put that on us. The only responsibility he puts on us is to tell your story and tell it the best way you can. If they choose to ask more and dig deeper into it and maybe get saved one day, that's between God and them. But you are the messenger. You are not responsible for the outcome. Okay. The other thing is that God's promises and God's track record will get you through. And as we've said before, as I learned from the last 2 years of COVID and all the stuff with my job and all this stuff that we were being threatened with, if it was easy, we wouldn't need faith. Okay. Hard times teach you faith. And faith will prevent panic. Oh, I just made that up, but that's pretty good. Faith, reading the book, reading the history, reading the stories, reading the promises of God, and relying on those promises will very much help keep panic at bay. Okay, so lean on it, dig in. That's what it's there for. God loves that stuff. All right, Mr. Nick, you got anything to add? Again, we're out of time, but it's a good lesson. It was an obscure lesson. I'd never read this before. I'd never studied this chapter before, but it's a good lesson. Fear and panic leads you into terrible decisions. Knowing God's history and track record can help you get your head back on straight again. So I guess that's the takeaway from the whole thing. All right. All right, I guess it's time to go here. Father God, thank you for this day. Thank you for the lesson. Thank you for what you taught me out of this lesson, along with the class here. And Lord, thank you for this venue to come and talk about you and grow closer to you. Father, as we leave your house today, keep us powerful and effective and productive for your kingdom. Provide for us and protect us as we go out, and lead us back here again next week. We love you, Father. In Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen. Thank you, everybody. We love you. Come see us when you can.